Hello gamers, Powered Heal here, and today we're going to be talking about world bosses. This is going to be the final segment, I would say, in the Dire Maul patch. Somebody brought this to my attention that we should make a video about this, and that's what we're going to do. So we will open up Atlas Loot, and we'll go to world bosses, and we're only going to be talking about Azuregos and Lord Kazzak here, because those are the only two that are releasing currently, and we will talk about the rest of them when they release. I think it's like phase 3 or phase 4. I think it's phase 4, maybe phase 5. I think it's actually phase 5. So yeah, just gonna be talking about these two for now. I'm gonna be talking about them from a healer perspective, and yeah, and so let's just kind of get into it. So Azuregos is like the one that everybody knows. I feel like, I mean, I guess people know both of them, but this is the one that people know of for having like good loot, and there's a good reason for that. It definitely, I think, has the better loot overall between the two bosses. Obviously, there's some exceptions here and there, but there's some pretty good loot. So let's start with the Crystal Adorned Helm, or Crown. This is obviously just really strong. Now, personally, I think this is best as like a Shaman item, or maybe like a Priest on Alliance side, right? It's probably not as good on a Paladin, or a Priest on Horde side. So if we're talking about like loot prio wise, this should probably go to a Shaman, just because Shaman always make the most of plus healing, right? Where Priests obviously benefit a bit more from raw stats, I would say, and things like MP5. However, this is obviously still really good for a Priest. It's going to have basically like 2 MP5 when you get your 3-piece tier 2. Until then, it has like 1. It has a decent amount of intellect and a massive amount of plus healing, obviously. So, not really much to say here. This is pretty much BIS. I think even compared to like Priest tier 2, it's pretty much BIS. Like, the only argument you could really make is that for Priest tier 2, like, the helmet is a good piece of the set if you want to use the 3 set like continually. However, you can always slot in a different piece and use this instead, and this will be better, right? It's just a really good helmet. So moving down, Drape of Benediction. This, I think, is like, it's decent loot, but it's sort of mid. If you compare this to the Dire Maul Cloak, right? Like, you can compare it to Hide of the Wild, and it has less healing on it, for basically like close to like 1 MP5, right, and a little bit more int. And if you compare it to the Dire Maul Cloak in West, you see that you're only dropping like, was it 33 healing on the other thing, right? So 26 and 33, I think that's what it is. 31. Yeah, okay. So 5 more healing on this cloak. Like 1 MP5, sort of, not even, right, until you get 3-piece tier 2, and then a couple more intellect. Really not a big improvement by any means, and I wouldn't use any prio on this. This is kind of just like an item that, is going to get rolled out amongst healers, and that's an item where I actually think that you could give it to somebody who didn't have like a good cloak at the time, I think it'd be fine to do that in that case, because it's just kind of like so mid, right? Snowblind shoes, so these are pretty good. They're pretty much like your best healing option available, but I don't know if people would really let healers roll on them. Typically, I've seen them mostly be caster prio, because I think at this point in the game they have like the most spell damage on them for basically any pair of boots, and casters, that's the only thing that increases their damage really, so they go crazy over even the smallest amount of spell power increase over anything else. So yeah, these are just like really strong. They're obviously good in PvP, but you're just probably not going to get your hands on these as a healer in most cases. Sometimes world boss loot is a little bit funky, because a lot of times it'll be highly dependent on who's scouting the boss, right? So if you want to get some of these items, especially items from Azuregos that are pretty good for healers, what I would recommend you do is communicate that early on with your guild master, and then, maybe tell him what specific items you're looking for and see how realistic he thinks it is that he'd be able to get you those items. And then in that case, you're going to have to most likely be one of the kind of like top scouters for the bosses, right? So you're going to have to be like one of the people that's got an alt parked out there, you have a warlock out there ready to summon, you know what I mean? So the more you kind of do for the guild to get the bosses, the more people are willing to give you loot. You're not just going to really show up to an Azuregos and get handed a Crystal Adorned Crown or Snowblind Shoes, especially the latter as a healer, right? You kind of absolutely have to work for it. So it's kind of like a lot of effort sometimes, but these are definitely good boots if you can get a hold of them. The wand is obviously, like, this wand would be super nice for farming, but it's just obviously going to go to a caster, and that kind of makes sense, right? Fang of the Mystics, this is like a better Mage Blade. This is really good, for sure. The problem is it's not better than Benny, really, for Priest, so you're not going to be using this as Priest. But as, like, Shaman or something, this is good, or a Druid, it's good. It's just that, again, this is probably going to go to casters. And realistically, it does the best in the hands of a caster because weapon upgrades for healers just really don't matter at the end of the day. Pretty much none of the stats are, like, that relevant, right? In terms of, like, your raid doing things better. Like, even if you, like, even me not having Benediction, I feel like I'm still the highest performing priest in our raid, like, kind of by far. I don't have it on either of my tunes. In every raid those tunes are in, I'm just, like, the highest performing priest. So there's no, like, obviously you would perform better if you had an item like Benediction or, like, just a weapon in general, but it's just not necessary in the slightest. Like, the difference it makes compared to, like, a warrior having a weapon or a mage having a weapon, really mostly just a warrior having a weapon. Honestly, these weapons aren't even, like, that insane for casters. They're just good in a relative sense, right? So, you could make the argument that, like, well, mages don't do a lot of damage, and, it's not really helping them that much either, so give it to the priest. But in reality, they're going to give it to caster DPS pretty much all the time, so I wouldn't even really think about this. This is one that's going to be hard to get, like, even if you're kind of, like, scouting, right? Especially as a priest. Like, you're never getting this as a priest, because it's kind of just trolling, because Benediction's really good. But even as, like, a druid or a shaman, you're pretty much never getting this, I feel like, even if you're scouting, unless, like, the people actually, like, just love you and, like, worship you in that guild. And the thing is, like, most of the time you're not even just competing against people in your own guild, you're in coalitions with other guilds, right? So that makes it even more problematic to try and actually convince multiple guilds now that you should be getting this over their casters, right? So pretty much not going to get this. You have much better chance getting the Snowblind Shoes, but definitely I wouldn't even worry about Fang of the Mystics. So that's pretty much all the healer items from here, right? And we'll go into Lord Kazzak. Okay. So this is just not a very good item, right? So we're not even really going to talk about that. It's kind of just like whatever. This, again, not really a good healing item, so not really going to bother. I actually forgot how bad Kazzak loot is for healers. So this is something you might want as, like, a Shadow Priest, but obviously Warlocks are going to want that. This might be, like, okay for a Paladin, honestly. Especially if you don't have any other rings. I don't know how bad casters want this. I think they tend to just prefer to have spell power. So this could actually be something that maybe on a Paladin you pick up, because the crit is, never, like, super bad, especially on a Paladin, due to how Paladin works. And if you have kind of, like, a ring with a small amount of plus healing, like if you have, like, the ring from, let's say, Darmal, right? From Darmal West, from the Prince, that gives, like, 15 plus healing, I would take this over that ring, because by the time you put that plus healing through the spell coefficient, you're getting, like, what? Like, 7 plus healing, something like that, like something really terrible, 6 to 7 plus healing. So I would just take the Ring of Entropy and try and get more crits. Yeah, so that's kind of my feelings on that, but I wouldn't really worry about this as any other class. And then this item right here is interesting. Now, for Priest, again, you run into the kind of like the same problem where this is just not a great Priest item, in my opinion, because of Benediction. Benediction being a 50% interchangeable drop change with the leaf is like a big factor in doling out any type of weapon to a Priest, in my opinion. I'll probably make a video about this specifically. That's like why you shouldn't expect prio on certain items. And that's basically why from a weapons perspective, right? Because you, even in an alliance guild where you have probably like 6 priests at least, right? Like 5 to 6, you're going to be doing Molten Core for a while. And the reality is you're going to get a bunch of benedictions eventually, right? Especially if you start doing stuff like split runs or something like that, you're absolutely going to get it. So it doesn't really make sense to, give an item that could really benefit another class to a priest who's going to automatically get his weapon essentially at a certain point and can only, like, he's the only one that can use that weapon, right? So this, in my opinion, is like a druid shaman item, since paladins I don't think can use staffs. And it's honestly like pretty decent in my opinion. Like, my first thought when I see this is kind of druid, only because shaman are going to tend to want to go for like the maximum amount of plus healing possible. And now that we have something like Diremal out, right, the offhand from Diremal is like 37 healing in itself. AV is going to be out in like a week. That offhand is like 50 some healing, right? So shaman are probably just going to want to go for like, the Aura Stone Hammer and MC, or even if they can't obtain that, they're probably still going to want to stick with the AV offhand and the blue healing weapon from BRD, right? So, but, they may want this, right? And if you have a druid that doesn't need anything, then I think it's reasonable. You can give it to a shaman. Druids obviously are pretty decent with plus healing as well, given that their bread and butter spell is heal rank 4, which scales at like an 85% ratio. The problem is the shaman is going to be doing a lot of your effective healing in raid as horde, right? Like, they're going to be the ones that are actually putting people's health back up, right? Where druid is going to be getting sniped like 90% of the time, and they are going to be, it's going to be like few and far between where they're getting like a ton of use excuse me, out of heal rank 4. So even though it does benefit them in that heal in a sense, right, it's still kind of like maybe a tough sell to give an item, or it's still kind of like a tough sell to be like, okay, like, we want to give them like the highest plus healing options possible, right? Because they're not using like even though their spell takes good advantage, like they're almost close to like the maximum advantage of plus healing, the shaman one actually benefits even more, and they're using it constantly, whereas the druid's main job is to like fairy fire, and they're cancel casting on the tank. So yeah, I think this is I view this as like a druid weapon for the most part, and obviously you can just kind of give it to other people outside of that, right? So if your druid has one, then you start giving it to shamans, and you can then give it to priests that don't have many, probably lasts. But I suspect this is going to be mostly shard tier, right? It's going to be druid, then shaman, then mostly shard tier. On alliance, it's probably going to be like, druid, then your priests that don't have Benny, and then they're going to get Benny, and it's going to get sharded, and then it's just going to be sharded from then on. So yeah, just not really great overall loot from Kazzak. Much better loot from Azuregos if you are a caster or healer, outside of obviously like the pants for Warlock or whatever. So yeah, that's pretty much the world boss in a nutshell. And like I said, I will, some PvP going on here, I will cover this in more detail when we or the other world bosses in more detail when we actually get to them, but there's no reason to really go over them now. So thank you for watching, and glad we kept this quick. Talk to you guys later. Like, comment, subscribe if you found this helpful. So thank you very much.